Hello, folks. Welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports on our continuing coverage of South Africa's 2024 elections on May 29th this year for national, provincial, and regional. Hey, 3 ballots. Mark your X on all of them. Are you confused? I know I am. But today we have with us a candidate for the Referendum Party, a new party, one of 31 new parties competing in South Africa's elections this year, and it is Robert King. Robert, how are you?
Well, the honest answer is quite exhausted. I mean, this is the last month of a really intense election campaign. Probably one of the most consequential elections we've seen in the last 30 years. But it's exciting nonetheless. I mean, every single day we see new events happening for the party. It really feels like we've got momentum on our side going into this election. And yes, it's quite an exciting ride, and hope it continues quite well.
Well, having run for office myself recently and having lost badly, I'd like to leave that caveat out. But having run for office, I can say that is quite a fascinating experience. It's also quite humbling knocking on people's doors and asking them to vote for you, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And I mean, especially when, you go to your neighbours, your friends, your family, and you speak to them. I've been really, moved by the amount of support I've gotten, certainly in my community, speaking to people I know, just to see people rallying behind me and the party. I mean, it's truly been quite heartwarming. And yes, and I think people are open to a change now. I mean, we've had this system for the last 30 years where people have felt quite voiceless. They've voted one way, and their votes, they don't really feel like their votes matter because they get a government that they never elected. And we're really seeing a lot of hope emerging from this campaign, and we really want to put the hope back into the Cape of Good Hope.
Well, the poster behind you in Afrikaans, does that say now or never?
Yes, it does. So we've got 2 posters behind me. If I can just maybe move to the side, you might not be able to see the other one.
Vote for a first world future. Yep.
Yeah, so those are 2 of our slogans. And because, when it comes to our 2 futures, we've actually got only 2 futures ahead of us. We've got about 50 different parties, but there are only really 2 options ahead of us. If we vote for the status quo, if we vote the way that we voted for the last 20, 30 years, then we sort of know which future we're going to end up with in the Western Cape. Well, we may end up with a DA provincial government. At the national level, it seems that we'll have some variation of an ANC government, whether it be an ANC majority government, although that seems quite unlikely, or an ANC EFF or Umkhonto we Sizwe government. So those are the options facing us, and that would lead us to a failed state. It will lead to a very dire situation for the Western Cape, where our economy continues to stagnate, where crime continues to get worse. But we do have an alternative. We do have an option to avoid that. And that's through, voting for a pro-Cape Independence Party, so we can secure a referendum for the people of the Western Cape. And that way, we can secure a first world future for the province, where we have control of economic policy, border policy, taxation policy, and security policy, sovereignty, where we can have the power to govern or misgovern ourselves and keep our government accountable to us.
Well, you're not exactly, you're kind of a spring chicken. You're not exactly a seasoned warrior there. You haven't been in the trenches nearly as long as my gray beard indicates I have. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you got into politics? What's it all about for you?
Well, look, I've always been quite interested in politics, especially international politics. That was one of my strengths when I got involved with the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. So it's quite an interesting, introduction to politics I had in South Africa. I found out about Cape Independence on Twitter back in about 2020. But I kept an eye on it, but I wasn't too involved back then. And then at one point, I set up a Discord server. So for people who may not understand what Discord is, it's basically like a messaging server platform where people with like-minded ideas come together and, just chat about them. So I set that up. And one thing led to another. I was invited to join the executive of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group in 2021, which I've served on since then. And I've been involved in pretty much all the important projects that organisation has produced, whether it be the Western Cape People's Bill or marches or polling. I've had my hand somewhere in that project. And then back in last year, about mid last year, some of us got together from the CIG and said, look, when we look at these elections coming up, we need to have an electoral alternative on the ballot so that we can provide, especially DA voters, a Cape Independence choice that they can feel comfortable with, knowing that they'll get a DA government and a referendum in Cape Independence at the same time. So I got involved with that, and one thing led to another, and here I am as a candidate for the party. I think I'm the only candidate well, I am the only candidate under the age of 30 to lead a party list in South Africa in this election. So I think there's often a misconception from many people that Cape Independence is mostly driven by older people and people who are retired. Actually, when you look at our candidate list, we've got a diverse candidate list with most of the people coming under the age of 40. It's young people excited about building a new future for this province, and I'm really happy to be a part of that team.
Well, I have to say congratulations to you and to the Referendum Party. You did get on the ballot. Apparently, MK did too, but maybe by nefarious means. but you did get on the ballot. But the Cape Party, the Cape Independence Party of Jack Miller, they have been removed from the ballot. They weren't put on, despite the fact they got 11,000 signatures. The IEC told them no. That was a bit of a surprise. Is the rise of the Referendum Party been at the expense, do you think, of the Cape Independence Party, or is it just unrelated?
Look, I don't really want to comment too much on other political parties because I understand that in their case, one of their issues was how they communicated the signatures with the IEC. I believe that in their court case, they had difficulties uploading the signatures into the online candidate nomination system portal where all your important documentation had to be uploaded. And for political parties contesting the elections, there were two options. You could either deliver this in hand, in person, at the IEC offices, or you could use this digital system like the Referendum Party did. And, luckily, we didn't have any issues ourselves. The CIP said they had some issues, and so they tried to communicate it by email with the IEC. And the IEC, as a result of that, rejected their signatures. But look, I think, you saw people wanting to see as many Cape Independence options on the ballot because Cape Independence doesn't appeal to one particular group of people. There's a wide array of people that come to Cape Independence. I mean, I know from my experience, there's right-wing people that support Cape Independence. There's quite left-wing people who support Cape Independence. But we all agree, with the fundamental principle that when it comes to decisions affecting the Western Cape, it needs to be the Western Cape people making them. But yes, it is unfortunate what happened with the Cape Independence Party. But I hope they still continue to play some sort of role in the Cape Independence movement, especially considering they do have some representation in the city of Cape Town.
Indeed, they do. They sit on the council there. Jack Miller is on the council, if I'm not mistaken. They had a couple more seats, but that was a whole other. They seem to be having a difficult relationship with the IEC, but I understand that. I've dealt with the IEC myself in the past. But again, congratulations to your party. The system can be a little challenging, and you did manage to pull that off, and you got the signatures legitimately, which is pretty awesome. So beyond the issue of a referendum for secession, which we've talked about with Joan Swart yesterday, your chief of staff, and I've talked to Phil Craig about it before when we first started talking about the party. Aside from the secession issue and a referendum on that, which is the raison d'etre for the party forming, what other issues are of major concern for your party and things that maybe you're passionate about that need to be addressed after this election? Because we'll be honest, the Referendum Party is not going to win a majority. Nobody's going to win a majority in South Africa. The ANC is going to be below 50%. But what are you hoping to achieve? Is it an effort to get enough seats to exert influence, to get things going the right way, to get a referendum on the table? What's the plan?
Yeah, so it's almost a two-part, answer to that question. Now, we did launch our manifesto recently, last week at the Eastern Cape border in quite a controversial event that has resulted in the ANC wanting to file criminal charges against us. I'm still waiting for Cameron Dugnall from the ANC to file those charges. I saw him on Friday, and we asked the question, and he still hasn't gotten back to us. But I'm confident he'll keep his word as a politician. But when you look at our manifesto, it's one of the shortest manifestos in this election. There's about 8 pages to it. And there's two fundamental points behind it. So obviously we want a referendum. And the way we plan to achieve a referendum is if we can get 100,000 votes. That's the difference that the DA had between a majority government and a minority government in the last election. So if they lose about 100,000 votes, that pushes them just below 50%. And that pushes them into territory where they require a coalition partner, which could be us or the Freedom Front or a party that supports Cape Independence. But apart from that, we also want to actually use the Western Cape Parliament so that it becomes the voice of the Western Cape people. Currently, the Western Cape Parliament, it's limited in what it's been able to do, but that's not because it's got limited powers necessarily. It's because the politicians actually in there haven't used it to its full capabilities. So we've only seen a handful of pieces of legislation actually proposed in the Western Cape Parliament in the last 30 years of existence. And some of the things that we would push for is advancing self-determination in the Western Cape Parliament. So trying to exert and take advantage of constitutional loopholes exist to empower Western Cape institutions and establish new institutions that are controlled by the Western Cape. And we would also infuse the discussion of Cape independence into every parliamentary debate we take part in. So those are some of the objectives of the Referendum Party. We're not coming to the table with a bunch of policies that we cannot implement. We want to actually change the system so that when parties do come to the voters with policies, they will actually have the power to implement those policies if they actually get elected.
So what's been the biggest challenge for you in the campaign so far? Have there been any challenges? I mean, for some parties, it's getting resources, and others, it's just getting the word out that they exist. But your party has got a little bit of press after its announcement, so maybe that helped. I'm not sure. But what challenge? I mean, for me, the challenge was people finding out who I am. You know, I got no help from the political party because they claimed they were neutral, which turned out to be a lie, but got no help from political party. And so it was just me knocking on doors, but you can only get so many doors. In my case, 28,000 registered Republicans in my district. I couldn't possibly have reached all 28,000 in 6 weeks because they shortened the campaign season here. Another dirty trick by the state. But the point is, what are the challenges for you guys been, and for you specifically? You did mention it out there knocking on doors, family and friends supporting you. That's rewarding. But obviously, you've got to go much further afield than that if you're going to get that 100,000 votes.
Yes, I mean, look, I would say, one of the things that we struggled with, early on in the campaign is, brand recognition. We're a new political party, and for a lot of people, the idea of a single issue party is quite a new idea. Yes, there's been the Cape Independence Party pushing that forward, but often people are used to parties coming to them wanting political power, presenting a large manifesto to them with a number of policies, and we haven't done that. We're a new party, making a new way in politics, taking a new angle to it. So that has been some challenge, but it's also allowed us to differentiate ourselves from our opponents. It's also been difficult, as a new party, trying to get media coverage. I think that's the case for a lot of parties. There's reason to believe that some media outlets in South Africa have been less than honest in their coverage of the Referendum Party. So let's put it that way. I won't name names. But those have been some of the challenges. But it's also the challenge of just a lot of people in South Africa, especially when it comes to their politics, are quite brand loyal. So especially DA voters. And most English voters, when you look at Afrikaans voters, there has been some shifting of vote patterns in the past. So that they might have voted for the DA, National Party, then the National Party, and so forth. So they've changed their vote over time. Especially with English voters, they've always voted for some sort of predecessor to the Democratic Alliance. So there's been the Progressive Federal Party, the Democratic Party. So trying to get people to break away from their long-held traditional voting patterns is always going to be a challenge. But that's why we've come to voters with our very simple message that, look, we're going to keep the DA in government in the Western Cape so they continue to run the administration because, they've proven themselves to be at least better administrators than the ANC, and they've got experience running the province. And we wouldn't necessarily want to disrupt that at this stage. But at the same time, we want to force them into a position where we've got leverage and we can use that leverage to force the Premier to call a referendum on Cape independence.
Well, let me ask you this question because, it's Cape Town. It's very easy to get locked in on Cape Town, a massive metropolitan area in a relatively confined geographic space. But is the Referendum Party also making efforts and a push out to places like Hout Bay and Hermanus? Nice a little further east, but what about Eiserfontein, Veldrif, places like that, Somerset West? Are you getting out to Franschhoek and Parel, or is it all focused in one area?
Well, look, we're not even, our party headquarters isn't even based in the Cape Metro. It's actually based in Wellington, in quite an interesting building, actually. The building we're based in is older than South Africa itself. So what a symbolic building to have as our party headquarters. And so am I. I'm not based in Cape Town. I'm based on the West Coast. And we've seen some of our best successes outside of Cape Town, especially in the Garden route, where we're really seeing a massive mobilisation behind the Referendum Party. Interestingly, you mentioned Knysna. Knysna is one of our strongest areas in terms of membership, and I think there's a very good reason for that because, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing those two futures play out in South Africa: the failed state future or the First World future. And in Neisner, people are starting to see the beginning of that failed state future where there's been mass illegal immigration coming into the town, where illegal settlements have sprung up everywhere. We've seen the removal of a DA-led government in that municipality and replaced with an ANC-led one with the support of the EFF and other parties that has really run that municipality into the ground, and they're facing administration. So we're seeing really strong growth in pretty much every part of the Western Cape, from Plettenberg Bay to Hout Bay. It really is remarkable, the people coming from different communities. We've even got a branch set up in Khayelitsha. So our Khayelitsha branch coordinator, he's one of our top 10 candidates. He's a really hard worker. He goes door to door, speaking to voters, collecting their details. He's probably been one of our most successful activists. And yes, we're seeing people from all different communities, all walks of life, from all parts of the province, coming behind the Referendum Party with our quite unifying message for the people of the Western Cape.
Well, that's fascinating that you've putting a foot forward and trying to gain ground there in Khayelitsha. That's I've been telling parties that forever, for donkey years, that they need to put effort in there. It's whether they want to go there or not. There are parts of that area that are quite dangerous, no doubt, but it's not the only part of the Cape Flats that's dangerous. I mean, when I was there at my last visit, the taxi wars broke out, in the middle of all that, and they were attacking motorists, and I was just a block away from where they attacked the Coca-Cola delivery truck in Mitchell's Plain when that was the moment it was happening. I didn't even know it was happening. It was just 2 blocks over. Yeah, it can be quite dangerous out there for everybody. So I think it's impressive the Referendum Party's made an effort to go out in Khayelitsha. Are you making progress? You say you've got a really hard worker there. Is he having any success?
Well, yes. I mean, interestingly, going back to that signature point, when it came to collecting signatures, we collected a lot of our signatures digitally, but we did collect some handwritten signatures at the same time. And the place where we got our most handwritten signatures was in Khayelitsha as the result of his work. So, yes, look, we can only see on election day how the results turn out. I mean, we can see positive trends at the moment in lots of different places. But it's only when all those ballots are counted on election day where we'll know if we've made some inroads in Khayelitsha. But considering the work that's been done there by our activists in the community and our ability to get onto local radio there, so on Monday, our coordinator there, Lyle, he spoke on the radio station there. So we have been able to get out to the people there, and hopefully some people there decide to take a change from their traditional voting habits and give us a chance in this election, and we'll just have to see what happens.
Well, as a young man entering politics, what's it like for you? I mean, I made it almost through 5 complete decades before I actually ran for office. But of course, I was in the Army for 37 years. That would explain why I never ran for office, because you can't do that in our military. But what's it like? I mean, in my youth, I anticipated running for office in my 30s and never did it because I was serving uniform. To me, it's a call to patriotism, to be a responsible citizen. What's it like for you, Robert?
Well, look, I would agree with that completely. A call to patriotism and being a responsible, citizen. Look, I mean, I was involved in Cape Independence for, many years before this. So it's really been a case of one thing leading to the other. And if you told me a couple of years ago that, I would be, running for office for a new political party this year, I probably wouldn't believe you. But it's been an amazing experience, really. I mean, it's allowed me to go to parts of the province I've never been before. Speak to people, that are really interesting, that have great insights, that have, had really, influential impacts on this province and, even the world. So yes, it's still a bit surreal sometimes, is the honest answer. I mean, I still can't believe that I'm actually, involved at this level in politics still.
Well, it is early days for you, so excuse me. Let me ask you this question. Of course, it was primarily one language spoken there. It was Kapsa back in the day. And then, of course, that became Afrikaans over time. Then English arrived. English became lingua franca there as well. And, of course, Xhosa were always nearby and then moved in larger numbers. So really 3 main languages spoken in that area. Do you have any proficiency in, not to put you on the spot, in Afrikaans or Xhosa? Are you familiar with those languages?
Well, look, my dad is Afrikaans, so when I was growing up, the only language he would actually speak to me is in Afrikaans. So, look, to be honest, my ability to speak Afrikaans is somewhat limited, but because of growing up in listening to Afrikaans and having an Afrikaans family, I can understand it fairly well and respond to questions in Afrikaans fairly well. But yes, generally my interactions are usually in English.
No, that's interesting because it kind of threw me off. The surname is King, so you never know what South Africans, families mix, that sort of thing. But okay, so your dad's Afrikaans, okay, but
Yeah, the King surname comes from the Afrikaans side of the family.
it must have been anglicized at some point.
Yeah, so I think if we trace it back, it goes back to the 1820 settlers. I think that's where it originates from. But yeah, there's Van der Merwe from my side of the family, so you can get into quite Afrikaans territory the further back you get.
Yeah, no, very quickly you get into that in very short order. But so with the Referendum Party, I talked to Joan yesterday. We had an interesting conversation about this whole situation. What are you hoping for? Where do you appear on the list? Are you 2, 3, 4, 5? Where do you appear on the list of candidates for your party?
I'm currently serving in the number one position for the party list. So that's what I mentioned earlier. I'm the only person under the age of 30 on all these political parties to actually appear first on any list.
Oh, I missed that part. My apologies. I thought you meant to appear on any list at all, and I was still scratching my head on that one. But you're the only person at the top of the list who's under 30. Wow, I didn't. Oh, wow, congratulations. That's actually impressive.
Yeah, look, I mean, it just goes to show, the Referendum Party really has such young energy behind it. And then if you look further down our list, our person in second place is under the age of 30. Our person in third place is under the age of 30. So, it's a very youthful list that we've got. Look, I'm hoping we're going to get the 100,000 mark. It's always good to, what's the saying? Under-promise and overachieve rather than over-promising and underachieving. So, look, I think 100,000 votes is, on the table. It is possible. It does require a lot of hard work, which we're putting in. And we'll just have to see how the chips fall on election day. I mean, if we can get 100,000 votes, that does put us in a very strong position, though, to force the DA into coalition in the province. And that's our main objective. I mean, if we can get 50,000 votes and we can get that outcome, that's great as well. But we want to just ensure that, the objective of forcing the DA into a coalition where they've got to call a referendum on Cape Independence, that's first prize for us.
Well, it would seem to me, reading the tea leaves, looking at the tea leaves, that odds are pretty good that you may find yourself sitting in government after this election, given that you're at the top of the list. I imagine Referendum Party should do well enough to at least get one seat. Wow, that's pretty exciting. Now, in the chat over here, Jacques Jourdan said, it's funny how easy it is to criticize people who are actually doing something while we're sitting on our butts and just complain. Jacques, I would agree with you 100%. A lot of people will complain. Some people may go after Robert and say he's too young. What's he doing running for office? Some people say it sounds like he's got a posh English accent, like he hangs out with the Spice Girls instead of an Afrikaans accent, and criticize that. But the young man has stepped forward, as I did, and I did so at great personal expense and spent a lot of money out of pocket to run for office, do the right thing to represent people. Robert is stepping forward, and he's mentioned here a long history of working with Cape Independence Advocacy Group. So I appreciate Jacques Jourdan's comment. Thank you for that. I think it's impressive when people step forward for the right reasons. I mean, we could sit here and talk about candidates for some other parties, and we know why they're running for office. Privilege, patronage, and blue light escorts. That's what they're looking for. Yep. Sorry, I've got a phone call I've got to ignore here. It's another spam call.
And that's the point I make. That's why we're so different from other parties, because the people behind the Referendum Party don't really want to be politicians. We didn't really want to launch a political party. I mean, launching a political party is not a fun endeavor. It's not fun. I mean, it's actually been a fun process, but it's not an easy endeavor. It takes a lot of work, a lot of sleepless nights, and especially when it came to the signature thing. So, it's quite a difficult endeavor. We would have preferred not to. We would have preferred for the DA to have stuck to their promises and actually called a referendum on Cape Independence. But things are what they are. We're not in this for political power. We don't want to form the majority party in the Western Cape. That's not our objective, to lead a government and then take all over the ministries and that kind of thing. That's not our objective. So we're coming from this from a far different angle than most other politicians or other parties come from.
Well, actually, what you're doing is participating in the democratic process, the way it's designed. And people do not get represented by the parties and candidates that are in government. Then it's incumbent on others to step forward with their own parties and their own candidates to get rid of the rat bastards.
Yes, some ordinary people. I mean, that's the beauty about the Referendum Party. I mean, it's not like we've got politicians who've been here for 20, 30 years coming on board with the party. We're all normal people from pretty ordinary walks of life they've decided to come together, stand up for a change. And we'll have to see how the votes turn out. But we have had a fundamental impact on this province, whether it be the Referendum Party or the CIG. And it really just goes to show that if people can be organised, if they're committed, if they really value a project, then even ordinary people, with no political experience, can really make a profound impact on the politics in that area.
Well, I think it's interesting from another standpoint, too. Having interviewed the three main groups that have been looking for Cape secession, that would be the Cape Independence Advocacy Group led by Phil Craig, the Cape Exit led by Des Palm, and the United Liberty Alliance led by Hein Marks. There is a massive number of people who've supported secession over the past decade or so who've supported those three groups. Can you imagine if the UALA members and the Cape Exit members vote for your party because it's the one party that's on the ballot that's focus is on secession? That would, if that happened, wow, this would be, I think, a shocker and would really wake a lot of people up in Western Cape. And with that, I call on the ULA and Cape Exit to consider voting for Referendum Party. I just to mix things up. I'm just saying.
Well, look, I've got some good news for you because last Monday, on the same day we launched our manifesto, the Cape Exit Accord was signed between the Referendum Party, the Freedom Front Plus, and Des Palm's Cape Exit, in which Cape Exit agreed to encourage their members to vote for these two parties that will be supporting Cape independence in the upcoming election. So they are, we're actually seeing, quite a, in the lead up to this election, which is just helping massively with the momentum. We are seeing, the Cape independence movement really uniting to ensure that we can really have a profound impact on the results on election day.
Well, that's interesting. Of course, didn't see any media coverage of that. It may have been some. I might have missed it. But, of course, I do subscribe to all the, as we were talking earlier to Fatima Abdul, and she kindly talked about the media. She talked about the normal media. That's not the term I would use. I would use legacy media. That would be, the legacy media don't do a very objective job in South Africa or elsewhere of covering politics. We can see that here in the U.S., where they're just bat crap crazy. But in South Africa, of course, Propaganda 24, my comment, not my guest, Propaganda 24, IOL, and even the organizations that used to be pretty objective like the Mail and Guardian, and even now the Daily Maverick are skewing in a direction which is not particularly objective, and it's unfortunate. But I didn't see this, so it's nice that you share that with us. That is an interesting development. I don't know what ULA is doing. Maybe I'll reach out to them and see what they've got to say in private, and maybe I could find something out about that. But wow, that is interesting. So you have a lot of candidates who are under 30. That's interesting. That's, I think, probably very refreshing for some folks to see that. I mean, we're always hearing endlessly, and I've heard this since I was a teenager, the youth. But youth just never show up. The only time we've ever seen youth show up at a national level in the United States was in 2008 for Barry Obama. They showed up in larger numbers than they ever had, but they were still an insignificant part of the electorate. He didn't win because of youth vote. He just got more of it than anyone ever had. And since then, they've just kind of gone back. And of course, the youth aren't static. People get older. So it's always a new group of people who are in that youth. That is interesting. So you're getting traction, it sounds like, with people under 30. Is that a true or a fair statement?
Look, I mean, the difficulty in South Africa is that we're a country with a very high rate of voter apathy. And the group with the highest rate of voter apathy is young people. So I think only something like 25% of under 30s or under 25s are actually registered to vote in this election. But generally, when I speak to young voters, they just get Cape independence quite easily. The idea of, taking control of ourselves. I mean, they've grown up seeing the country, especially in the last 15 years and longer, they've grown up seeing a country that's gradually been declining. And they've seen that, they've lived under the ANC their entire life, and this is the one opportunity they've got to break free. Because, you look at the polling that's done, most of our university graduates want to emigrate. I mean, I know from personal experience, a large, portion of my friend group has already emigrated. So we're seeing that all over the place. Young people, they don't see a future here. And with the Referendum Party, that starts to emerge for them. So it will be difficult to say how much support we're going to get from young voters just because so few of them are actually registered to vote. But I know we were in Stellenbosch on Saturday as part of a Cape Exit awareness event where all three of our organisations were together promoting things, and we had some Stellenbosch University students come over to our gazebo. They took some flyers from the party, they got some T-shirts, and they agreed to go around the campus, spreading the word of Cape independence. So look, we are starting to see some very positive signs emerge there.
Well, it is an interesting paradox when you look at it. I mean, for instance, I'm sure a lot of my voters, and not because of my age or anything, but because of my viewpoints, conservative, many of my voters were people over the age of 60. I can guarantee you that. But it is a paradox in which older people tend to be more consistent voters than young, and that plays out over time. It's not simply a phenomenon of right now, but it does play out over time. But the youth that we're talking about, anyone under the age of 30 is a born free. The only government they've ever known at the national level is the African National Congress, and it has failed them on every level, every single level. And of course, I mean, that is the primary motivation, is it not, for the Referendum Party for secession, is because of the failures of the ANC?
Look, I certainly think it's a motivating, factor. I mean, one of the biggest motivating factors. But for me, it goes more than that. I mean, I've written an article about, how Cape Independence is more than just escaping the ANC. I'm a strong believer that communities and people are best served when they're making their own decisions. So, when you have a country of 60 million people that's highly centralized at the national level, if you have some disastrous policies, then that's going to really negatively impact people across the board. Where if the Western Cape has the freedom to make its own choices and to choose the right voices, make the right decisions, then we can at least alleviate some of the suffering that emerges from that. But when you look at South Africa, there is a big ideological divide, and even if there's a change of government in the rest of South Africa at some point in the future, it's still going to correspond, some way or another, to that ideological divide. And we can see this from election results over the last 30 years, where basically the Western Cape has voted consistently one way. A majority of voters have never once elected the ANC in this province, where voters in the rest of South Africa have preferred African nationalism and policies relating to that. So, African nationalism, it's quite a racialist worldview, strongly, centered on a, strong state, centralization of industry and the economy, and high, many race laws. So that's what we see with African nationalism, and we see that as the ANC loses votes in the rest of South Africa, they're mostly going to the ANC, the EFF and Mkhonto weSizwe. They're not really going to Action SA. They're not really going to the DA. It's largely to those two parties. So that's where the divide is in South Africa, and I think the only way that we can actually manage that divide going into the future is if the Western Cape can secede from the rest and make its own decision so it can correspond with our values and the way we'd like to see the world turn out.
Well, I suppose if I could synthesize that a little bit, and you can correct me if you think this is not an accurate view of what you're saying, it goes beyond, you did say clearly, it goes beyond just the failures of the ANC, but the argument that you started to make, and that's why I want to codify this, the argument you started to make is that, well, people should be able to devolve government down to the lowest level. You're describing federalism, which is not the role in South Africa. It's more centralized. It's supposed to be what's happening in America, but our federal government has grown way out of control, and federalism is in jeopardy here. But, I mean, that argument, anybody could break away. I mean, I want to be the Republican Naisna, so, I mean, I'm going to break away. But there is, I think, one aspect here that's unique, and you kind of touched on it, and that is that the culture, the history of the Western Cape is different in many ways as a community than it is in the rest of the country. There are pockets that are similar to the Western Cape, but the Western Cape in general, with Afrikaans and Xhosa and even the English element, has built I don't want to say unique, but a different culture than you find in much of South Africa. Is that a fair statement, or did I mischaracterize?
Yeah, that's a very fair statement. And I think, that unique culture that's emerged in the Western Cape, it is, the foundations of that is non-racialism. And we see that in the democratic era, where parties that promote non-racialism have consistently done very well in the Western Cape. But we also see that in the pre-apartheid era, where when you had the Cape Colony and the Cape Province, one of the defining features of those entities were their non-racial franchise system. So, even though it was, disproportionately white, and there were certain caveats, you had to own land and so forth. That was a very strong foundation that if we had, maybe not joined the Union of South Africa and we had continued on our own path, as R.W. Johnson, the writer, pointed out, we could have seen a far different future for the Western Cape, where there was a transition to majority rule far, far earlier on than the rest of South Africa did. And I think that's the foundational feature of this unique Western Cape political culture that we see, and that is non-racialism, which is far different from African nationalism that predominates in the rest of the country.
Well, absolutely. Non-racialism seems to have died in South Africa. Reading the MK Manifesto, which I have right in front of me. Yeah, South African society is dominated culturally, artistically, spiritually, and economically by a minority group with an alien culture. Boy, that sounds very Rainbow Nation not. That is the MK Manifesto. Pretty frightening stuff there. Folks, you're listening to Chris Wyatt Reports on the Adopt Africa channel. My guest today is Robert King, number one on the list for the Referendum Party as it seeks to gain votes in the 2029 elections coming up. And if you're South African, you're confused, get in line. We're all confused. 3 ballots. There's a pink one, a blue one, and I forget the other color, an orange one, I think. And you got to vote one time on each ballot. Good luck with that. Anyway, but that's what's coming in. One ballot, you vote for one of the 200, you vote for a party, then you vote for a candidate on the 200, then you vote for... Anyway, if you're confused, get in line. Anyway, Robert King, our guest from the Referendum Party here. Robert, going forward, let's say Referendum Party gets the 100,000 votes it wants. The DA, which was approaching 50% in the municipal elections, only had 53% last time. And they had 56%, if I recall correctly, in 2019, but 53% in the municipal. Now, you can't compare. There's apples and oranges, but there is some correlation there, declining support. But if the DA gets 49.9% of the vote and you get a couple seats, they're going to need somebody. They're likely, I think, going to turn to the Freedom Front Plus, which probably get a couple percent at least. But if they go lower than that, then I suspect they may need to come knocking on your door.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, when you consider what we're actually putting on the table, it's a very sweet deal for the DA. Because what we're saying is, look, we're not coming with a bunch of policies. We don't have ministerial positions. We don't have political power for ourselves. We just will support your program in government. So everything you've put in your manifesto for the province that you want to do, where you want to spend your money, where you want to do this, we'll support that. But we want a referendum which 79% of your own voters want. We want to have something that your own voters support. So, and I think that's going to be a far easier pitch than a lot of the other parties are presenting, because other parties will want seats in the provincial cabinet. They will want other policies of theirs implemented in government as well. We keep it straight and simple. We just want one thing, and we're going to push hard on getting the referendum. That's our sole objective, is to ensure that we get this referendum on Cape Independence.
Well, if I recall correctly, Alan Winde did publicly state that the DA would support a referendum a number of years ago on Cape secession. Or do I have a bad recollection there?
John Steenhuisen did.
Was it Steenhuisen? I thought it was Winde. Okay, it was Steenhuisen. Okay.
Alan Winde's always been a bit more. Well, he's always been, far more consistently hostile to Cape independence. But the thing to keep in mind is the Western Cape people don't vote or don't really elect their premiers. When you go into the ballot box and you've got your provincial ballot there, you don't see Alan Winde's face on the ballot. No, you see the
DA. You vote for DA. Yeah.
Yeah, you see the DA, and the DA deploys their premier candidate into the premier position, and they have the ability to remove that person from office. So, look, we had this agreement with John Steenhuisen and the DA. Alan Winde might, feel like he has this divine right to govern the Western Cape as premier, but at the end of the day, the constitutional provisions that exist that allow for a premier to call a referendum, it's not there to serve the political interests and the political will of that premier. It's to give the people of the Western Cape the opportunity to have a direct say in the government that governs them. It's not for Alan Winde to pick and choose when it's convenient for him to call a referendum. He should listen to the will of the Western Cape people, which we've consistently shown in our polls. I'm sure they've done polls that have said a very similar thing. And, if they were a Democratic Party, if they were the Democratic Alliance that they claim to be, they would have called the referendum, already, but they haven't, and that's why the Referendum Party has had to be set up. We didn't want to set this party up, but because the DA can't, stick to their promises when it comes to Cape independence, we've had to set up this party, and I believe a sizable chunk of their voters will come over to us as a result.
Well, to be fair to the Democratic Alliance, if you look at their voting base and you subtract the votes in the Western Cape, they would not be a very large party in the rest of South Africa, with the exception of Gauteng. So it's, for them, understandable. It's probably self-defeating, but then the party never should have made the promise on a referendum. That was probably not a wise move.
Of course. And then when you look at the Western Cape Constitution, it's the responsibility of the Western Cape government, which the DA leads, to look after the interests and protect the interests of the Western Cape people. Now, unfortunately, voters in the rest of South Africa have not given the DA the mandate to govern them. I know we've got friends and family that live in the rest of South Africa, and we wish, there's a number of strategies they can use to actually contend with this, rapidly declining state. But in the Western Cape, the DA has been given a mandate for the last 15 years, for the last three elections, a majority mandate from Western Cape voters to protect them and look after their interests. And first and foremost, the DA in the Western Cape needs to serve those people rather than voters in the rest of South Africa. The Western Cape people voted for a government, and that government should look after their interests.
Well, that seems a very reasonable point to make. There's been a pretty significant demographic shift here in the Western Cape, which was majority colored South African ever since the early days of European arrival in the Western Cape, and the mixing of the Huguenots and the Germans and the French, or not the French, the Dutch, with local Khoi San and others. We've had this colored community develop in South Africa. Of course, people coming in from Asia as well being part of that mix. But they are no longer the majority group. They're plurality still, but they're not the majority group. So the demographics have been shifting. You mentioned the Referendum Party has a focus in a place where this is primarily happening on the ground in the Cape Flats in Khayelitsha. Is that part of the concern for the now or never? Because you have a group of people coming in, not based on skin color. That's not what I'm talking about, but based on to use the MK's term, an alien culture coming from the other parts of South Africa that's not part of the Western Cape norm, or I don't know if that's the best term, but the Western Cape culture. They're coming in with different views and historically voting for different groups, not for the Democratic Alliance. This demographic shift, is it something, is that why it's now or never, or is your party just concerned that it's going to collapse? South Africa's going to collapse?
Well, it was because of a variety of factors, but that definitely does play a role. One thing you have to remember with the Referendum Party is one of our top 4 points which we talk about is borders. Now, we don't have a problem with people moving to the Western Cape. Obviously, Bill Craig, he's an immigrant to the Western Part of my family are immigrants as well. But we came legally. We came to the province legally. We settled in the province legally. Our families bought properties or rented properties or did whatever. We came legally. But the problem we see in the Western Cape today is a large number of people coming into the province and illegally settling on land, grabbing land, which causes a variety of issues in Western Cape communities. I mean, we see economic issues emerge where you have to formalize these communities, where you have to spend public service, invest in public services in these areas, which puts even greater pressure on an already strained rate-paying population in Cape Town. It leads to social issues because you see in certain areas rapid demographic changes in a very short period of time, which naturally and understandably and rightfully do lead to concerns in communities when they see massive changes like that happen. And that leads to social tensions, which should be avoided. It should be in a controlled manner where you see these changes happening in communities. And we've even seen environmental consequences. I mean, there was a nature reserve in the Cape Flats that had to be delisted as a nature reserve because of people illegally settling on that nature reserve. So we see it, negatively impacting Western Cape life from a variety of factors. And unfortunately, a lot of the illegal migrants entering the Western Cape or coming to the Western Cape, generally they don't vote. But when they do vote, they have a very, very negative view of the DA. I believe the DA's support among black voters only lies around the 2 to 4% range in the Western Cape. So it is incredibly low. And there's a large and strong popularity for the EFF. So it's not necessarily that there's a love for the ANC, even though a lot of people do vote for the ANC, but there's actually a massive love for the EFF. And we've already seen in certain limited areas the results of this. A few months ago in Vredenburg, in the West Coast, there was a ward where the majority of residents are from the Eastern Cape. And they went to the polls in a by-election, and the EFF won the ward with about 60% of the vote, gaining the ward from the ANC. So there was a massive swing against the ANC there towards the EFF. And if we look forward 10 years, and if the EFF can mobilise more people to the ballot box and get more people into the province, then the ideological makeup that we've been used to in this province for a very long time, the traditions, the values, the way we see the world in the province, is at grave threat, and we run the risk of possibly having the EFF play a very, very large role in future politics in this province.
Well, that is a frightening prospect. I just say that. So your party's manifesto launch. Sorry, I've told most of the candidates it's a word that I just have a hard time saying. It's something that I associate with communist manifesto, but I know it's part of the vernacular in South Africa. You guys also call traffic lights robots, but anyway. So, but seriously, that was a fascinating story here. People calling for the arrest of people. If I understand correctly, there was a manifesto launch at the border on the road between Eastern Cape and Western Cape, but the road was never blocked when traffic came through. People vacated the road, allowed the traffic to come through. It's not a heavily trafficked road. This wasn't the main highway we're talking about here, but it was symbolic. Were you there for that?
Yes, no, it was quite an interesting experience, really. So it took place last Monday. We went up on the Sunday, and we stayed in some accommodation near to the border. I think as close to the border as you could get. But there was very poor signal reception in that area. And one of our candidates, Joe Emilio, he's got his wife's got quite a large Twitter following. So we went into this accommodation. We couldn't reach out to our families or anything like that, and people understandably got worried. So some posts were put on Twitter. A lot of coverage was given on Twitter to where are they? We can't find them anywhere. So as soon as we got into signal, as we were driving to the border to set up this thing, suddenly, we saw these messages and we saw the attention surrounding where we were. So everyone was looking for us. We got to the border, we set this up, and I think this gave us just the extra momentum we required. But yes, we never blocked the border itself. We put basically a temporary structure next to the road for about an hour. It might have even been less than that. Some road workers, drove to the location, and rather than trying to shut us down, they put on Referendum Party T-shirts and they started chanting "Free the Cape" and waving flags as well. You can see that on the video. So, and yes, I mean, we delivered our manifesto speech there, as John Stiennes has done before as well. I mean, people complain about roads being used for political stunts. I mean, for the 2021 elections, John Stiennes stood in the middle of the road. I don't know if they blocked the road for their video. Who knows? But we, delivered our speech. We had a lot of interviews with our supporters who were in the area there, and it was quite successful, as based on the media coverage and the hysterical response from the ANC to that. It's quite funny. I mean, they get upset about a temporary structure next to a road for an hour, but they don't say anything. In fact, they encourage the millions of illegal structures that are springing up all across the Western Cape in these illegal settlements. I mean, you couldn't make it up, but really they're not a serious party. And the most recent polls say they're only going to get 17% of the vote in the Western Cape. So, we don't really take them too seriously. But when they scream and shout about you, it's great the media attention that generates.
Well, the hysteria wasn't limited to the ANC. Also, a member of the Western Cape Provincial Legislature from the Democratic Alliance made some very disparaging remarks on Twitter, which she quickly withdrew after being exposed for her mean tweets. A lot worse than Trump's mean tweets.
Yeah, look, I mean, look, she's apologized. Look, I won't really go too much on that.
Yeah, no, you don't have to respond. I'm just letting the people know. It's just a full disclosure. It wasn't just the ANC. Of course, it's funny how people have such short-term memories. Yes, it was hardly an original concept that you guys came up with. The Democratic Alliance has done it multiple times. They go to the border and show the difference in the coal tar on one side of the road and the condition on the other. They've made videos driving across the border and published those on their website. So, yeah, it's very hypocritical of any member of that political party to criticize your political party for doing what they've done numerous times. It is, but anyway, that's politics. It's dirty. It's nasty.
Yes, but look, I mean, luckily we've got the facts on our side. Well, like, we don't go into this, with misleading statements or anything like that. We come in with facts backing us up. And I think that also contributed to our success so far, is that people know we're saying the truth and they find it to be quite a refreshing approach to politics.
Indeed, it is. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I got any traction at all, is because I was honest with people and I wouldn't pander to them. If they asked me a hard question, I told them the truth. I told them my positions, and I said, we don't have to agree, but I'm not going to lie to you to get your vote. Whereas one of my opponents was like a chameleon. One day the guy says this, the next day he says that. Just depends on who's talking to him. Unfortunately, a lot of times those are people get elected. So, but I don't think that's going to be the case in this election. I think enough people are disenchanted with the ANC that people before the rise of MK, many ANC voters, I think, were going to stay home like they did in 2021, the municipal elections after the insurrection that took place in KwaZulu-Natal and in Soweto, when the government either ignored or facilitated the chaos that ensued and did very little to stop it. So many ANC voters were disillusioned they didn't vote, and the ANC shed voters like viral particles, just sloughing them off. I thought that was going to be the case again this time. That's why my prediction in November of 2021 was the ANC would get no more than 42% of the vote, but possibly as low as 38% this election. And I didn't know the date of the election. I also didn't know that ESCOM was going to give the gift of no electricity for 287 days last year. I didn't know that was going to happen, or that the ANC would be supporting the terror group Hamas over Israel. I didn't know that gift was going to be there either. But now I think that a lot of those disaffected ANC voters in KZN and Gauteng in particular are going to the polls to vote for Jacob Zuma's MK party. It's fascinating to see the rise of that party. Now, your party, very different focus, very different location, and it's also, I think, interesting to see. I don't know if it's a rise. We'll see how you guys do in the polls, but certainly the emergence of the Referendum Party. You sound very excited about the prospects for the party and the chances to make a change in the Western Cape.
Yes, absolutely. And look, we're entering the most unpredictable election. We've seen, in the last 30 years, we've sort of had an idea of how each election is going to turn out, one way or another. The 1994 election in itself was more of a negotiated agreement when it came to, how those results turned out. But this election is completely unpredictable. It's possible we'll see the opposition take control in Gauteng or KZN. But, as you mentioned with the MK party, I think that has to a large degree dashed hopes in those two provinces. Gauteng was a knife edge before the launch of MK. I mean, if you looked at the polls, you add the ANC and the EFF vote together, they were about 50%. The opposition was about 50%. And I think MK is going to provide some crucial percentage points in Gauteng that will push them over that 50% mark. And then if you look at KZN, extraordinary what's happened there. I think a lot of the gains that were being made by the IFP at the expense of the ANC have now reversed completely and have gone over to MK. So I've seen pretty consistently now that every poll in KZN, or virtually every poll, has Mkhonto we Sizwe as the largest party. And it doesn't really suggest that our democracy in South Africa is maturing when two of your insurgent political parties are on the left, are parties that have military wing and freedom fighters in their name. I mean, it suggests quite a bleak future for those parts of the provinces. But in the Western Cape, we're coming to this election with a message of hope, with a message we can make a better future in this province if we take control of our own affairs. And an analogy I like to use when it comes to this is, look, we're not coming here with a finalised painting. We're coming here with a canvas. And it's up to the people of the Western Cape, once they've got that canvas, to paint the country they would like to see. So, the paintbrushes are like the policies. You paint the policies on that canvas, and then from that, you'll generate the country you'd like to see. And I think knowing the people of the Western Cape, knowing how they want to see their country turn out, knowing what their values are, I think we could probably be, or we will be, the most successful country in Southern Africa. I've no doubt about that.
Well, that's a fascinating perspective. I'm giving just a moment here. I'm going to make a final comment here to something in the chat. Tertius Ferreira said something, the ANC's always supported Palestine. Why the surprise? You infer incorrectly. I'm not surprised the ANC is supporting Hamas. I'm surprised that the ANC claims the moral high ground. I had no idea that Hamas was going to invade Israel on October 7th of 2023, nor does anyone else, including Israeli intelligence, apparently. but I didn't know that. And I didn't know that the ANC was going to travel to Tehran and then within hours or days after that, suddenly file a case at the International Court of Justice. I'm pretty good at predicting things, but I didn't predict that. The ANC was silent on the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar when the Gambia did the groundbreaking case of genocide at the ICJ against Myanmar. South Africa did not play a role. Not even an amicus brief, a friend of the court. They sat back and said nothing. The South African government under the ANC has been silent on the situation in Darfur. It's silent on the 5.5 million people displaced between the Rapid Support Forces and General Burhan's forces in Sudan murdering each other and the mass starvation now taking place there. It is silent on the conflict in the Sahel. So for the ANC to take a position of moral high ground, claiming that it is protecting people against genocide, which doesn't meet the definition of genocide according to international norms and law, is what surprises me. It's comical, to say the least. Anyway, that's answering Tertius Ferreira's question. Nothing to do with the conversation here, but he did raise the question because I made a comment. So with that, Robert, I'll give you the last chance to get something in here. Tell people why they should go vote for the Referendum Party. And by the way, it's not just in the Western Cape. You can vote for the Referendum Party elsewhere, too, if I'm not mistaken. Or are you on the ballot elsewhere? I know you've got members around the country. Maybe you could address that and then tell us about why people should vote for the Referendum Party on May 29th.
Yeah, so I just saw some photos today. We've got posters that have gone up in Pretoria and Nelspruit from our two branches that operate in those areas. So we are on all three ballots in the Western Cape. So we're on the Western Cape provincial ballot, which elects the Western Cape Parliament. We're on the Western Cape regional ballot, which elects certain members of Parliament to the National Assembly from the Western Cape. And then we're on the national ballot. So on the national ballot, people in any part of South Africa, or indeed the world. So we're currently working to make sure that we've got some sort of election table outside the embassy in London, so that Cape Independence supporters in London who are voting the elections can also vote for the Referendum Party. Anyone can vote for the Referendum Party on the national ballot. But look, it's very simple when the reason for voting for the Referendum Party, and it comes down to the message of the two futures. If people vote the same way they've done for the last 30 years, and we end up with a DA majority government in the Western Cape and some sort of chaotic coalition of chaos with the ANC and the EFF and the MK at the national level, then South Africa will become a failed state. There's no question about it. We will see a worsening crime situation from the horrific level it's already at. We'll see unemployment get worse. It's 25.6% in the Western Cape. That's the lowest in the rest in South Africa. But if you compare it to any other part of the world, it's a complete disaster. That's going to get worse as well. Our border policy, is a mess, and it's only going to get worse. And we're going to end up possibly with an EFF government not too far in the future governing the Western Cape. So people need to make a stand in this election. They need to make a stand for their future, and they need to take control of their future. And the only way they can do that is by voting for the Referendum Party, so we can force the Premier of the Western Cape to call a referendum, so that we can take control of our future and we can build a first world future that the people of the Western Cape want, deserve, and should have. With power, with the ability to make our own laws, spend our own tax money, and control our own borders, we can build something pretty incredible to leave to our children and our grandchildren. So that's what I'd like to leave all your viewers with.
Well, that's pretty awesome. But actually, I have an alibi fire, if you don't mind me asking one more question. Thank you for sharing that. But I meant to get to this sooner, but got distracted earlier. You look behind me, you see shelves full of books. I look behind you, I see shelves full of books. Gareth Cliff, when I'm on his program, shelves full of books when he's at home. I really appreciate when people have books, especially if they're not simply props. I get the suspicion that they're not props. You've probably read most of those books, if not all of them. I take it education is important to you.
Yes, it is. Look, I'm actually still a student, so I'm still studying politics, philosophy, economics. So that is generally the area, that I'm always trying to improve my knowledge in. Yes, look, I mean, when I get the opportunity, I haven't really had the opportunity in the last few months to get into much reading, other than, news articles and whatnot. But certainly after the election, once there's, at least some room to breathe, then hopefully I can, return to reading some of these books.
All right, and with that, folks, Robert King from the Referendum Party. Robert, thank you very much. Kia loboa, baya donkey. Thank you for your time. It's a pleasure, and good luck on May 29th. We'll be paying attention. If things go well and the passport agency gets my passport back to me in time, I will be in South Africa covering the elections live. If not, I'll have to come afterwards when the rugby is on so I can watch the Springboks pummel Ireland. Well, thanks a lot for coming on. I appreciate it. I'll give you a chance to drop off there. I'll close up the stream. Folks, you'll be directed automatically to the news after this. Thank you, Robert. Best of luck.
Thank you so much.
All right, folks. Robert King from the Referendum Party. I'll let him drop off the broadcast there. He's going to do that now. Okay. All right, thanks a lot for tuning in. I do appreciate it. Thanks for the comments and questions. In interviews like this, I can't get to all the questions, but I did get to some of the questions and comments there. No, I am not at all surprised by the actions of the ANC, but I did not and could not predict the October 7th attack and the subsequent actions. I'm simply pointing out the hypocrisy of the African National Congress representing South Africa. It is inconsistent when it comes to human rights. It's inconsistent. It does not hold the moral high ground. South Africa, for its position, will make the same comment about the United States. We are the country, of course, responsible for the abuses at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq 20 years ago, and you would be correct to point that out. But I believe in truth and calling out hypocrisy when I see it. There you go, folks. Thanks for being here. I'll be on with the news in just a few minutes. Stay around. Give me a minute or two to go to the loo, get another drink here to freshen up my drink, and we'll be back with the news in just a couple minutes. You'll be automatically taken to that broadcast, so stick around. And thank you all so much for your time. And to my guest, Robert King, thank you for coming on the program. It was a pleasure, and we'll see you guys here in just a couple minutes for Chris Wyatt Reports. Cheers, everyone. Take care.